All right. Thank you everybody for attending my talk. What I learned about automating security. This is my first time in Europe, let alone Oslo. So it's been a wonderful trip. Thank you for attending the talk. I know it's the second last session in 2 otherwise very full days. I promise you your head will not hurt from my talk. It's very high level. It's like a very gentle sort of million-mile overview of different areas of automating security. Okay, but I welcome questions, so please, I'm happy to take them through the talk, or you can ask after the talk, or of course you can hunt me down after in the hallway. So we're going to cover off the agenda, introduce myself, set the stage with the problem, looking at reactive types of automation and then proactive types of automation. So, we're already quite good with reacting to a security event. How can we streamline that? And what can we do to be proactive to try and stop them? Then we'll have a look at what the gaps are and why maybe we have these gaps. What isn't automated and why? And then if there's questions. So this is me. I'm from Australia, Perth. This photo is taken not last Saturday, but the Saturday before while I was on holidays. I think that day was about 32 degrees. It was beautiful. I find your minus degrees challenging. But I walked outside earlier and I think it was snow. I have no experience with it, but it was quite novel for me. So I'm learning quite a few things. I work for Microsoft as a cloud solution architect, and my job is basically just to help customers realize value in what they've already spent, so I don't have to sell things, which is wonderful. I like going outside. I love the beach, and I'm a champion too in Rocket League. So, yeah. So to set the scene, there's a lot more jobs than qualified people in cybersecurity, whatever that category is. And it's actually going to keep growing in a couple of years. The statistic is there'll be 3.5 million open roles. So that's not the employed people, they're the ones that we can't employ. So there's going to be a bit of shortages. Worse, our data estates are getting more complicated. It's not just straightforward. You have a file server and an application server. You have a lot of distributed type systems. You'll have lots of multiple clouds, lots of multiple cloud providers, and then people want to work from everywhere. So you can't just have like your traditional environment. The expectations of the business and the users have forever been changed because of COVID. I actually don't really know what it was like in Europe. Did you face a lot of lockdowns and have like that mass distribution and then you all work from home now and then they're like, come back to the office and everyone's like, no. Yeah. See, users' expectations have changed. So you can't have like your sort of standard security boundary to protect your network now because that boundary is wherever your users are. But you're still expected to keep them safe. You're still expected to keep your organizational data safe to protect that IP. So what makes it even more challenging is a lot of the tools that the attackers are using now are the tools that the administrators are using. It's just that they're using them to do bad things and we're using them to do good things. And then you need to then have some way of being able to, with your tooling, understand what is the good thing and what is the bad thing. So you've got like your security analysts sitting there trying to troll through, unlimited logs that are scrolling through at 1,000,000 miles an hour, trying to work out what's going on. It's not very practical. And, we're still being phished every day. Passwords are still being stolen every day. Credit cards are being stolen. All of these attacks don't stop. So the problem's getting larger. The criminals are getting smarter. We're getting busier. And we're not getting more people. So it is a real problem. So the presentation title is what I learned about automating security. You know, we're all professionals. We're all trying to learn every day. In my day job, I help people use products. I don't necessarily go through deploy automation solutions, but it's an area that I'm interested in. And a lot of the products that I deploy, I'm not going to talk about them, but they have automation in them. So it's quite interesting to me. But what is automation? So I've got two definitions. The first one you can see here, and that's from the International Society of Automation. So I guess they're an authority. And that's the creation and application of technology to monitor and control the production and delivery of products and services. Then IBM has a different definition, which is as a term for technology applications where human input is minimized. This includes business processes, automation, IT automation, personal applications such as home automation and more. So the general idea is the system does the work for the human, right? To try and lift that load, or to do something which is boring. Because, you know, if you can automate a task that's boring but simple, then you don't need to do that boring task. And that's kind of like the dream. Does anyone have boring tasks in their job? Do you automate the boring stuff? Right? I think that's a Python book, right? Of that title. So I'm going to split the talk into the two parts. I'm going to talk about the reactive and the proactive. And we're going to start with that reactive security automation. I think it's kind of something that we're already really quite used to, but maybe you haven't really considered. But it also depends on what your role is. So I'm not a developer, and I'm sure some of you in the audience are because we're at NDC. So if I'm telling you stuff you already know, just bear with me. And if I'm wrong, tell me. But, you know, there's a few ways to have a look at this. But if you're developing something in-house, then you need to try and do everything you can do to make that safe, right? Now, we've seen a lot of presentations around infrastructure as code or shifting left essentially and moving all of your security scanning and testing into earlier stages of your pipeline and actually trying to build it before or test it before you build it, right? So doing all of these is actually a set of automation. So if you're a one-man team or woman team, then it's kind of essential that you build into your pipeline some form of testing because you probably don't have that time to be able to sit there and test exhaustively. But further than that, you probably don't have time to sit there and understand, you know, if you're using, you know, a library or some other dependency in your software, whether or not it's vulnerable, right? If you're using code from someone else, how do you trust that code is safe? So you need to build into your pipeline ways to actually check other people's code as well as your own code when it's being built before it's being pushed. If you're actually administering an environment, then you need some way to understand the software that's been installed in your environment and whether it's up to date and whether that is safe, or whether the software you install from someone else has got dependencies and whether those dependencies are safe. It's actually like a logistical supply chain problem. So you need to have some sort of agent installed or some sort of process created so that when you're pushing out software, whether it's being built or installed or upgraded, you know that it's safe. And this is something that a human can do, but it's boring, right? So you can install software. If you were looking after an environment, you could have, you know, something like Qualys or Tenable, and you can run your agent. But that sort of stuff happens once a week or however often you run that scan, and then it gives you a report, and then you've got to look at the report, and then you've got to action the report. So it's not really that well automated. There are other products where there's a threat and vulnerability agent installed with the product, some endpoint protection, for instance, so they can report and tell you. And then you can create workflows with these tools to inform the teams who are responsible for maintaining the software. So these are just little automations. They're not like the big, you know, you're never going to get like I'm going to click a button and solve the problem, because the problem's a little bit different for everyone. So how do you write the solution? So you look at automating little pain points to try and remove friction between teams. And with the threat and vulnerability management, that's one of them. When you're pushing code, you'll be able to do your testing and scanning beforehand. I do think that having a good culture of not actually wanting to have insecure stuff in your environment is probably more important than automating it. Having a group of people that care and incentivizing a good culture rather than thinking you can solve the problem with technology will get you further. But sometimes you don't have time to care enough. So you've got to balance that off. Infrastructure as code. So this is, quite similar to what I was just talking about, but a lot of the checks or the automation that you would have in this would be for configuration. Make sure you're not putting things like secrets in. Having infrastructure as code also gives you the other advantage that if you can get to that point, you don't have like all of these unique servers that you need to manage or, unique platform resources, because it would be so much easier if you got hit by ransomware, if you could wipe your environment and deploy it again. But if you have all of these bespoke servers that you've got to go through and individually configure because you've created your systems in such a way that they need to have, this one needs to have maybe a bit more extra RAM, or this one needs to have a faster disk, then you're not going to be able to easily just rebuild. I suppose you could have a separate template for each one, but it would be better if you can have just your set of standards and be able to deploy those out. When you're deploying it, earlier in that pipeline, you can make sure your configs are checked. You can have processes in place so that, if you are pushing something out, you can have a peer review, which is very important. And all of the different steps, you can have like those automations, and they're just built into the products. Like that's built into GitHub, or it's built into Azure DevOps, or if you're using GitLab or any of the others, they'll have all of these steps built into them. You can also make it so that if you're working with another party or another provider, you can have like sanity checks built into that deployment. And you can also make it fail if it doesn't pass those checks, right? Because when you're busy or you don't have a lot of time, you'll probably let things through, even if you shouldn't. So if you build that governance layer into your deployment pipeline, you take that decision away, and you kind of enforce a higher level of a level of care. So, threat protection products. There are a lot of vendors that have these. They all promise a lot. It could be more than just an endpoint protection. It could be collaboration protection for your email and your, if you use Office 365 or Google Workspaces, or Amazon has a product, Workspaces, I think. So you can have like your threat protection products. So you can protect your email, protect your cloud storage providers. So you can protect your endpoints, your servers, protect your Active Directory, protect your Exchange if you've got that unfortunate situation where you have an on-premise Exchange. And these threat protection products, their purpose is to provide assurance against known threats and stop behaviors from, leveraging activities. They might use heuristics, and they'll use threat intelligence sources to basically stop threats from occurring, or once they've occurred. It really depends on what the threat is. Sometimes there'll be like a known series of steps that a common ransomware operation is using, and then, it'll stop it before the ransom can occur. So you can get your protections for your IaaS, your PaaS, and your SaaS. A lot of the time, if you mix your vendors, you don't get a good outcome. Sometimes you don't get that choice, and you'll have one for your endpoint and one for your cloud, and maybe one for identity because of contractual obligations or decision makers who have got good mates. But a lot of the time they don't integrate well together. So if you are using a threat protection product, try and at least find one either pure play from a single vendor or have a look at integration so that, you know, if an attack starts on an endpoint and then goes into, you know, a cloud resource, the product linking those actions and being able to generate alerts with all of the different activities in a single point makes the security operations much simpler. Otherwise, you have to build in all of those analytics into your SIEM, which we'll talk about later, right? But having it all in a product that will do that work for you is preferable. I mean, if you're in a large environment, you're going to see, you know, hundreds of alerts a day. So if your product will go through, categorize those alerts, link alerts together that are related across multiple parts of your estate, you'll save time. So that's a really valuable automation. There is no silver bullet. No matter what you do, it's going to be noisy, right? So it's still going to generate work. You're not going to replace the work, but it's going to help focus the work of your security operations team. So having that threat protection automation is an assist, not a solution. So the threat protection products kind of install on into solutions. So with email, you know, you make sure all of your mail runs through it, or with your endpoint protection, you install it on a host, whether it's an end user host or a server. But your users will do a lot of things and use their end user device as like a window to the world. And how do you protect all those things that they're doing? So you use a cloud security access broker. Cloud access security broker, CASB in my mind. Anyway, and these monitor the traffic that goes to your cloud resources, whether it's a cloud resource that you're paying for. I'll always say Office 365, obviously, but it could also be if your users are using a third party that you're not sanctioning, maybe like Dropbox or a Citrix file share. It could be when they're using Netflix. It could be if you're using Salesforce. You know, so it could be legitimate or illegitimate. Anytime a user will be accessing something through a HTTP or HTTPS, a CASB can monitor and protect it. So what would you want to do? Well, sometimes that visibility is really important. Behaviors don't always equal bad activity, but some do. So if a user account suddenly copies 50 gigs to a OneDrive, that might be suspicious. But it's a normal behavior. It's not like it's going to trip a security alert. It's not like viruses run, right? So that CASB gives you that visibility. But then you can create file policies. If you see more than 10 files or 2 gigs copying to external service, trigger a security alert, right? And then even further than that, you could, if you're, you know, a bit savage and don't care about your users, disable their account. Because it could be that their account had been stolen and someone was using their account to copy out your intellectual property. Or it could be someone preparing to leave the organization, want to take all their work because they want to use it for their interviews with their new jobs that they're hoping to get. You know, you need to be able to protect your environments so that your users can't exploit you. And we're users, right? So it feels horrible to say it as such, but our role is to protect the organization, not to protect, well, we protect our users by protecting the organization. So a cloud access security broker gives you that visibility, and then it allows you to create activity or file policies to prevent bad things from happening. Now, there's 2 ways traditionally how they work. You can configure it to capture proxy logs, but in a distributed world where we're all kind of wherever we want to be, you're probably not going to be using a proxy to filter your users' traffic, right? So having a solution, either whether it's an agent that you have to install or having it built into like your endpoint protection is probably preferable. Whatever you do, but don't create yourself a burden where you've got yet another agent to update and manage, because then, you know, you have to make sure it's up to date. Because it's doing everything from the cloud, if your CASB can integrate with your identity provider, you'll get additional intelligence and the ability to understand what's going on in your environment. So it might be that, again, if a credential is stolen and your identity provider has, you know, the ability to understand what behavior looks normal, then that could be linked with unusual behavior with files or accessing other cloud resources. Then you can get an intelligent alert, which will help your security analysts or your security operations. The last thing which they can be used for, which is really useful, is you can make them work as a reverse proxy. So if you're, say, in a Azure AD environment, which a lot of people will be, you can use conditional access to say, you know, if someone's connecting with this criteria and you determine that criteria is likely hostile, you can make them go through the CASB before they get to the resource. So normally it just passively collects information, but you can force the connection through it. And then you can say no downloads or no printing, right? And then you'll be able to allow a user to still be able to access data, but if they're a hostile environment, limit the risk. Because everything we do is risk mitigation. We're not trying to, you know, solve all world problems. We're just trying to make things a little bit better. And all the little tools or all the different tools, you make things a little bit better. So, cloud infrastructure. How do you automate that? Well, you're going to have your infrastructure or you're going to have data sitting in a service that you're subscribing to, right? So you first of all, you need to actually understand what it is that you're trying to protect. If you don't have all of these Snowflake servers, then you don't necessarily need to protect all your configs because you can just wipe them and rebuild them. It might be just the data that's sitting on your servers or in your services. It could be your databases. So you need to have some form of platform protection that can understand the activity that's actually occurring with your cloud resources and make intelligent decisions based on that. So it's like having a threat protection product, but what do you actually do if you've got like your whole estate in AWS? Where's the threat protection product sit? So you need to actually get like another cloud hosted service that can sit as an overlay over your cloud so that it can monitor all of that activity. And then based on that activity, it can generate alerts. It doesn't have to go into a SIEM. A SIEM can do it, but you can also have your cloud protection workload protection. So all of the clouds, they automatically have, you know, a certain level of auditing, and then you can go in and you can configure and turn on more auditing, but then someone has to actually look at that activity log. And if you've seen a cloud-based activity log, it's not very interesting and it's not actually very meaningful either. Unless you know something has gone wrong, then you go hunting for it. So having a product which will actually provide you that cloud workload protection, look at the activity and automatically generate a flag if something has occurred is a useful sort of automation. One of the problems with putting all of these, you know, automated solutions to generate security alerts is you actually see a lot more in your environment than you would have beforehand. Ignorance is bliss, right? So sometimes I've seen customers with my work actually get frustrated when they secure their environments because they think that these products are going to come in and reduce their workload. when really it exposes all of the skeletons in their closet. So it's something to be mindful of, like when you put in solutions that will help, understand where the problems are, that you will find problems. But it's better to be aware of it and then, be able to have an intelligent discussion rather than be ignorant and say, I don't know, when, your environment is locked out. So there's also the cloud security posture management. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but that one's a little bit more proactive, because you'll be able to set what you would allow before build or before it runs. So, data loss prevention. And I've put physical infrastructure because, your endpoint protection or all your threat protection products are going to kind of trip if something's going out through a network connection. We've become so focused on the internet. I mean, the internet's awesome, but people still plug USB drives into computers and copy data off them. So having some form of DLP is probably important. You don't want to completely impact your users' productivity and just, like a lot of really hardcore, or I guess security professionals who have been burnt like to say, oh, we'll just use super glue on the USB ports. But that's not very practical. So having a DLP solution in your toolkit, which can, monitor what files are actually being copied, and then either stop it or create an alert for you, is useful. And then if the solution is, got granular configuration, you can have different profiles based on the users and what they do. So some people, if they're in HR, then they are actually allowed to copy confidential user data. Whereas if they're a frontline support person, they probably shouldn't be looking at it and they should be flagged. So having data loss prevention is important, so long as you don't go too hardcore. We're making good time. My timer here is like, I have no idea. So it'll be a short talk. So proactive security automation. What can we do to try and reduce the likelihood of something bad happening rather than really drag out having to chase after a bad guy all the time? So one of the first things is your user entity behavior analytics. We're quite predictable as humans. We do very similar things every day. I'm sure if you mapped out what you did, you probably get a coffee around the same time every day, go to the same websites. Your job's possibly not that interesting that you do really broad things. So an analytical solution would be able to get a reasonable understanding of what you do and what is normal for you and what is normal for your organization. All right, so having user entity behavioral analytics means you'd have a solution which is able to analyze activity and create a flag if something's gone wrong. And you can have that flag if something's gone wrong, if something is going wrong but hasn't gone wrong. If that makes sense, you can have a session get revoked or have an activity stopped or have an alert created before they're able to, pivot and do a lateral traversal across 4 hosts until they find some sufficiently privileged credentials so that they can do something bad. So I think this on its own is not useful, but having it with the right, other products, so leveraging it in your SIEM would have a lot of benefit to your organization. This isn't automation, this is analytics. So the automation is when you actually get it to do something based on what it sees. A lot of the time you can't just automate stuff, but because the business doesn't want to upset the users. I don't know if you're a developer, you probably don't have to worry too much about upsetting a user. But if you're in administration or security, like GRC type role, you always have to balance impact to business versus managing the risk. And some places have like this really strong ethos of we will not upset our users until, they lose all of their email. And then they'll be the victim, right? So it's important to manage that risk appropriately. So we've come back to that cloud security posture management, but this is the other side. Rather than the workload protection, this is the configuration management or posture management. So we're in Europe, you'll have to adhere to GDPR, I'm guessing. Right? So wouldn't it be nice if you had some way of knowing whether you're compliant with GDPR without having to do a manual check? Now, you might not be able to get 100% of that check done, but if you could get 90% of that check done and then only have to check 10%, then all of a sudden your jobs become a bit simpler. So having a proactive set of policies applied to your environment which match standards or frameworks is a really positive automation, because the automation isn't necessarily, making your website faster. But if someone builds a new product or deploys a new product, then it can automatically be checked and then highlight invalid configurations, or even better, prevent you from building. Then that automation has saved you time now because you fix it before it's deployed, and it saved you time later when you've got to explain why citizen A's data has been stolen or lost or misused. So it really depends on the environments that you operate in. If you're in a bank or in any of the financial services industries, you'll have other policies that you need to adhere to. If you're in the government, I'm sure there's information standards. A lot of the cloud providers have pre-built templates, so you can just apply them to your environment as policy. If you're using the cloud security posture management software, they'll also proactively do this. And even better, give you reporting. And reporting is boring. And if your report is automated, that's great, because then you're proving that you're doing your job, or proving that your environment is what it needs to be. You can have an attestation. And even better, you can have like an audit trail showing improvement over time, because all of these things are what managers and high upper executives like. You don't have to be perfect, but if you can show that you're improving, then it's really useful. So this is really similar to the cloud policy, to the cloud workload protection, but this is a little bit different. Cloud policy can be your own internal policy. So if you're in Azure, you can say you're only allowed to build these resources in these regions, right? And it might be, well, how is that a useful automation or, for security? Well, it's useful for cost management. It's useful if if a privileged credential has been stolen in an automated attack, because you can really quickly deploy resources in the cloud, right? That's the point. Everything's meant to be fast and easy. And you might want to prevent your users from accidentally deploying a virtual machine with 128 CPU cores and 2 terabytes of RAM, because I imagine the per hour charge would be quite expensive. So you want to limit the SKUs that they can build. You want to limit the regions they can build in. You might want to enforce there must be tags, or it must be enrolled into whatever security products that you're using. Well, all of these things can be done by policy. So you can make it so that a lot of these decisions are made for the user or your administrators, and then your environment will be consistent. And if you put it in policy, then you don't have to put it into your build process, because the actual cloud environment will automatically do a lot of things for you if it's assigned through policy. Or if you have an environment where you can't upset people or make things hard, you can make it so that it just audits and flags when it's not compliant. And then you can generate a report for your whole environment on the level of compliance that you've got. So all of this is kind of an automated thing in the background, which is there to make your environment more simple to manage, which will then make it more secure. Seam and saw. They're buzzwords which have thankfully died down a little bit last year, but the year before they were like kind of everywhere. So SIEM is, where you forward all of your security incident and events so that you can collate them all, and your security analysts can, understand if there's an attack going on. Good SIEMs have a lot of analytics built in, so they reduce the work and create alerts for you. But then they'll create a lot of alerts. So you need to then go back and pare it back so that you're only getting useful alerts, right? But a SIEM itself is a useful tool. It's an essential tool, not useful, because there's no way to get all of your other disparate logs into one place. The SOAR side of it is security orchestration and response. So that is the automated side. Basically, events will come in, your analytic rules will generate alerts or maybe incidents depending on your platform. Then for specific incidents, you can automate responses. So if you're seeing the same incident come in, but it is somewhat legitimate, you need to respond. And that response might be get the user to reset their password. It could be a really simple response. That's the automated part. Or it could be lock the user out, or it could be generate an alert, send emails. All of these don't have to be massive, but like you can basically automate the steps that a security analyst would take and have problems get remediated. And then when you have difficult problems, or I'll call them bespoke problems because they don't occur often, then your analyst can spend the time there. Because you don't need to get like a really highly skilled, well-trained person and then kill their soul by getting them to do the same grind every day, right? If you get good staff and you train them well, then you want to empower them to automate all of that really simple stuff away so that they spend their time doing hard, fun things. Well, I think hard things are fun, but like maybe you want easy, fun things. But as long as it's fun and not repetitive, I think that's the important one. So with your SOAR, it really gives you the ability to respond, reduce the workload, and I guess amplify your workforce. Makes one person worth three because you don't actually need the 3 people. So where are the gaps and why? I haven't mentioned much around proactive testing, like pen testing or software testing. I mentioned a little bit in the CI/CD pipelines, right? But there are SAST and DAST solutions, and I'm not going to tell you about that because you'd need to tell me. I'm not the developer. But there are lots of well-known, easily accessible, open source solutions that you can put into your build pipelines to do testing. And then, there's other automated scripts that you can run to do automated pen testing on your environments. If you do your job right in the first place, all of these should fail, so I don't think they have a lot of value. If you've got an environment where you don't have a good security culture, there's probably a bit of value and they'll find things, right? But if you've got the right tooling, that you shouldn't. So I spoke with, you guys would have heard of Atlassian. The head of their red team lives in Perth. So that's really cool. I get to ask him questions and learn from him. And I'm like, so why don't you automate all your pen testing? And he said that the cost of creating the automation is higher than the cost of paying someone to do the pen test, right? And then the attacks change so frequently that you don't get a return on the investment of the time spent doing the pen test. So that's why they don't do it. And then I was at a security conference in Melbourne, and there was a vendor that had an automated pen testing solution. And I'm like, well, you know, how is this any good? And he's like, oh, it's not bad. And I'm like, well, how current is it? Like, how current are the things that you're testing for? Is like about 3 months behind. So if a CVE is known and there's an exploit made available, in about 2 to 3 months, it'll be added to their product, and then that will automatically be included when they do their pen testing in the environment. And I'm like, well, why is it like this? And he's like, well, an attacker or a script kiddie, they just go to GitHub and get a tool and they run it. And if they crash everything, they don't care. But if we crash everything with an automated pen test, we won't have any customers. So they actually have to build a safe pen test and safely learn if they can exploit. Does that make sense? So it's tough. But if you've got like a skilled pen tester, they would be able to probably not crash the environment. So having like that, having that testing is basically a huge problem. The other thing is like a lot of the time the threat and vulnerability management is not automated. Like I said before, someone runs it once a week, and then based on licensing models, they might only run it against their servers. So they don't actually look at what the state of their endpoint devices are. Mix that with local admin, people using their laptops everywhere, installing personal stuff, then you've got like this messy soup of software on these laptops and how you're meant to manage them and keep them safe. So having a solution where threat and vulnerability management is built into your endpoint and automatically reports and is like live data is really useful. So that doesn't have to be a gap, but in my experience, a lot of the time is. So I've mentioned that the pen testing isn't automated. So that's that. Thank you. I promised you wouldn't have to think too hard. I don't know if I was 20 minutes or 40 minutes, but I'm done. If you have any questions, please throw them at me. If you don't, please be kind with the thingy at the back. But yeah, I do welcome you to come and have a chat if you don't want to ask, or if you've got a conversation rather than a question. So thank you.